Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history for Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and our guest today for the third time. And the reason for the third time is that we're going around the town and mentioning every single store that we can and all the people who worked in there. And our good friend Carl Dudley is the oldest living person to have worked downtown some 45 years ago. So we have asked him to do that. Carl, you know, so that we have a little bit of the background about you and your family and so forth, you have already given us something of your background, but how about reviewing your family, starting with you and your wife and your children and so forth?
Okay, my wife's name is Catherine. We have recorded that. We had 3 daughters, and I have 5 grandchildren, 3 granddaughters.
Tell us a little bit more about Catherine. She was
Well, Catherine was a very quiet person, and I probably couldn't have run my store without her. She was a good buyer and a good merchandiser. But I should, for posterity, for my people, I should tell how I met her, perhaps.
Yeah, let's see. Here, how did you meet her?
One of those Ann Landers how we met stories.
Oh, really?
Yes. Well, I was at the time managing and playing softball for the Newcomers Town Merchants fast pitch softball team.
Fast pitch?
I emphasize because it wasn't, you toss it in and hit it like everybody does today. Well, I was managing playing shortstop, and there was a young man playing first base for me. His name was Harold Hoffman, a nice big fellow and a friend of mine. We ran around together some. And one Saturday night, we went down to West Lafayette. They were having their annual homecoming. I'm ahead of myself. Catherine came in the store where I was working and left a watch to be repaired. Of course, I had her name, and I thought she was very attractive, and so I was interested. I had her name, that's all I had, but I mentioned to Harold Hoffman, and he said, "Oh, that's my cousin," and he and I were,
for heaven's sake.
he and I were good friends, you know. So we were running around together and cruising around one Saturday night, as young people do, and went down to West Lafayette, and they had the annual homecoming. And Catherine and her friend Bo was there. And so Harold handled introductions, you know. And so we asked them if they'd like to leave and go to a movie, get out of that place, you know. And
Well, you surely didn't want to be at homecoming.
so Catherine called Harold aside, and they had a little conversation, and I didn't know what was going on. And she had thought I was married, and she wouldn't go see. And Harold had to convince her I wasn't married. And so we did leave and went to a movie. Then went to, they had a lot of drive-in restaurants at those time, hamburger places, you know, we went to that. And I think the rest of it I've recorded here before is history. We had the 3 daughters. And
Well, you didn't tell how you got married and how long you courted, though. You have to tell us that.
we got, pardon me?
We want to know all the details.
Well, okay. Well, that was about August of '49. We got January '51, we got married. And Harold and her friend, I don't believe, ever saw each other after that. It's one of those stories. They never saw each other again, and we did and got married. Then we had a nice family and nice grandchildren.
And three children, 3 girls. And
Right.
Tell us who those girls are again and where they are.
Janet lives in Danville, Pennsylvania. Mary lives in Stowe, and Nancy lives in Wadsworth. And she, as I said, is a teacher's aide down at Franklin. We have to get in for Franklin there.
You're keeping that going.
Okay.
Last week when we were together, the last time when we were together, we went all the way from the end of the square, the south end of the square, and the west end, starting at the west end at Lyman Street, Pardee Street, coming up east and going then south on Main Street, crossing the street, coming up north on Main Street and turning to the right and going out east on Broad Street. Today we're going to start with the gas stations on the north side of Broad Street, go west and then go north on High Street, cross over, come south on High Street and go west on College Street. But we forgot somebody the last time. Who was that?
Sam Klein.
And what does Sam Klein have?
Sam had a men's clothing store.
Klein's Men's Store.
Just men's store, I believe.
And tell us where it was on Main Street on the east side.
Okay, it'd be on the east side, and just about where Amschutz is.
Right. About 2 doors up from the school drive, right?
Yes.
There
There was another building in that West Notto, as we said, was there.
Western Auto, and then there's a pool room.
Right.
And then there was Sam Klein's store.
Right.
He and his wife worked there, but they were from Akron. They were not from Wadsworth, right?
True. They still lived in Akron.
And can you tell us a little bit about Sam and his wife? And I can't think of her first name right now.
Sam was a rather tall man, very courteous, and tried to help you.
Born abroad somewhere.
Yeah, I believe he was
Both
of Jewish descent.
Jewish?
And very honest, very upright.
Oh, yes, very much so. And had a little bit of an accent.
Yes, he did.
And his wife also had a little bit of an accent.
Yes.
But she was also a tall lady.
Yes, she was.
Both of them were tall. I don't know whether they had children or not. Do you?
Yes, they had a son.
Did they?
Because I worked for people in Akron, Schulen's, who were their
Schulen
friends.
Jewelry?
Yes, they were their friends. And Schulen's son used to always say his parents got on him, quote unquote, because he didn't do as well as the Klein's son did.
Ah, okay. So you knew then the Kleins had a son.
They had his son. Evidently, he was quite industrious and quite intelligent, and the Schulen boy was too. But you know how parents are sometimes.
Oh, sure.
They thought he wasn't as good as the Klein boy. Not as good, but
Sometimes they use that as a motivator.
exactly.
Negative motivation.
So they
doesn't
had
work.
this one son. That's all I remember.
And I cannot think of her first name, but I know it, but I can't think of it. And if anyone does, I'm sure that person will call. Now, let's go to the big brick house, which is right opposite where the post office used to be. That would be right on the corner of Broad Street and North Lyman Street. And not that that has any particular significance in terms of business, but that was always a doctor's house. What doctor lived there when you were in town at the beginning?
I don't believe there was a doctor there.
Dr. Biggs wasn't there at the time?
No, I've heard
Okay.
his name. No, he was not.
And then Dr. Biggs was before.
Yeah.
Right next door to that was a gas station. Who owned that?
Now we're talking about the West End, the one Sam Welty had? Or?
No, the one across the street.
Oh, okay. That's before my time too,
Okay,
Caesar.
that's before your time. Then let's go to Sam Welty's there on the corner where the library stands today, on the northeast corner of Broad and North Lyman.
Right.
Sam Welty.
Sam was there, and he did my mechanical work. He was a top-notch mechanic.
Oh, he surely was. And he has a son who's already
Gary
started.
has done a lot of work for me too.
And
I
Gary's
think
on a-
Sam, before he had the station, he told me was at Hayes Arnold, maybe there. head
Yes, he
mechanic
was. Mhm,
Or something
He
like
was at Hayes Arnold before that. And do you remember the Girl Scout house right behind the, there was a house right behind
There's some stuff back there, and I can't quite come up with how
We
that
had, it
was.
was called the Girl Scout house. I don't know why they call it, well, because the Girl Scouts met there, I suspect.
Probably.
It was a nice little house. And then, do you remember Ella M. Everhard's library, the big brown?
No, actually, that was a few years before me too, I believe.
Okay, our new library was built then.
Yeah.
Okay, then we go from there next door to the carburetor ignition. And what do you remember about that?
That was Hayes Arnold Chevy Agency when I came to town.
Okay, Hayes Arnold.
Then the next year,
Lauren Hayes and,
well, Arnold wasn't there when I came
no, he
to
wasn't
town.
there, but Lauren Hayes was there.
Right, exactly.
Lauren Hayes was a stocky man,
Yes, he was.
stocky and not too much hair, and if it had any color, it was kind of brownish reddish,
Right.
wasn't it?
That's true.
A ruddy complexion,
Yeah.
and always wore a straw hat.
Yeah, he did have. I forgot about that.
He wore a straw hat. And do you remember anybody else who worked in Hayes Arnold at the time?
No, because it's a short time to when I came to town. He sold it to Jack. Now I bought my car from. He may have been there at Hayes Arnold from a Browning.
Bob Browning.
Bob Browning, I believe, was working for Jack in the next year when I bought my first car there in 1955.
With Jack Summer, you mean?
Yeah.
Right, Jack Summer, right. And Bob Browning was working at that time. And then Jack Summer moved from there and went
Correct.
out east of town, so that if the building isn't there when people review this 50 years from now, about 1.5 miles east of town, on the south side of the road, and about 1,000 feet east of Silver Creek Road.
And I
Right.
believe that time was in a township.
I think it still is.
Is it still in the township?
Well, maybe it's not, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I remember some controversy about it.
No, it's not in the township.
That's right.
No, it's not in the township. I'm positive of that because right down the street from there, the council person from Ward 2, Marcia Lehman, lives.
Right.
So she'd have to be in the city.
Yeah, I know there's some talk about that, hey, he's moving out of town, moving to the township.
Right, that's right, exactly. But it wasn't in the township at the time, that's correct. Now, carburetor and ignition, my brother Henry used to work
Yes, indeed he
for
did.
there. He started there in 1941. 1941 or 42, something like that, and he never had another job in his life except that he built his own building then and had his own mechanical shop, Carino Ignition.
He did some fine work for me.
Yes, he did. He's a good mechanic, there's no question about that, and ran a good shop. He died on January 14th, 1996.
Okay.
I think, yeah, 96, that's right, 96, right. Then we go there to, what do you remember being just west of?
It's been a lot of years. I forget some of the stuff, but the diner was right there someplace.
The diner was then moved from the corner of South Pardee and Broad, the southwest corner of South Pardee and Broad. It was moved from there and put then right next door to the carburetor ignition, or Jack Summer Chevrolet, or whatever you want to call it. But before that, there was a building that had Trent the tailor in it.
Yes, yes. Dudley Trent's father, I forget.
That's right. Trent the tailor, and then below there was a dry cleaning establishment.
That's right.
And what else do you remember about that?
I believe that Guy Jackson and
Crooks,
Sid Crooks had a barber shop there too.
Describe Guy Jackson and Sid Crooks.
Well, Sid was the taller, the bigger man.
Tall.
Tall and
whitish hair. Always wore a green shade.
Right. And Guy was not short, but he was shorter and stockier than Sid was.
He was stockier. Well, did Guy have any political aspirations?
Well, yes. Guy was, of course, a very good councilman from the ward, and then I believe at large. Then he ran for council president, I believe was defeated, and he ran for mayor also.
Right. Do you remember what his party was?
He was a Democrat.
He was a Democrat. And do you remember anything about his being a councilman?
Well, I wasn't following council too, but I know he was a good councilman, and I know after he was defeated for his other positions, he ran again in his ward, and he was easily reelected. They thought a lot of him.
Who defeated him as a mayor? Do you remember that?
I guess Jack Summer.
Jack Summer did, that's right, yes. And Jack Summer, therefore, was a Republican.
Right.
Right, okay. The barber shop was in kind of a little wooden building.
Right.
And what was right immediately adjacent to it? As a matter of fact, it's part of the same building, I think.
I'm not sure now. There was a house in there someplace. And I think the name was Akers lived. Where did they live?
They were behind.
That was behind.
Yeah, the house was behind.
Okay, okay.
And immediately right adjacent to it, in the same building, was a bakery.
Oh, yes, sure.
The Wadsworth Bakery.
Right.
And George, and I think that he was either Greek or perhaps...
I think they were French, weren't they?
No, I don't think they were French.
That's not the Frenchers.
No.
Wasn't there someone in town that had a French bakery?
Well, I don't think so. I think that George might have been a Slavic of some sort.
Okay.
But they used to call him Greek because people in Wadsworth thought that anyone who was not English or American or German or something like that would either be Greek or Italian. Well,
Okay.
they were Slavic. And then they sold it to the SOSS, the Sos family, and they had the bakery there for a long time too. They were also or SOOS, Seuss family, and they had a bakery there for a long time as well. And then, of course, they demolished that building and they made the parking lot.
Right.
Do you remember when they demolished the building?
Yes, I remember that.
Do you remember anything about the demolition? I mean, was there any, right now if you demolish something, you have someone standing there with signs and placards and so
All
forth.
kind of permits.
Did they have anything at all about that?
I don't think so.
And then what was right on the corner? The big
Brenneman's drugstore.
Brenneman. Tell us all about Brenneman's drugstore that you can remember.
Well, of course, Brenny was very outgoing, and he'd been there long before I came to town. I remember two of his pharmacists, Bob Brown.
Bob Brown. I had him on the program here.
Oh, yeah, and Merle Yelenick.
Merle Yelenick, right.
They were, Merle was, of course, very small.
Yelinek.
That's
And he
true.
lived on Woodland Avenue, I believe.
Yes, he did. I think his wife was a Parmalee.
Yes, she was a Parmalee. And whom else do you remember in there?
Rose Goals, G-O-L-Z.
Rose Goals,
She
yes.
worked at the fountain there. We're probably through the whole store, but I used to and did a cherry Coke. That was a great thing in the Rose.
It was. And what did you pay for a cherry Coke in those days?
I think it was 10 cents.
10 cents. Now you pay what,
90, I don't know.
90 cents or something like that?
And there were 2 or 3 ladies named Fulton worked in there.
Yes, Selena Mae Fulton
And Ruby Fulton.
and Ruby Fulton, right.
And maybe an Eileen Fulton, I'm not
And
sure.
Eileen Fulton. And Eileen was, had, her maiden name was, I can't think of it right, but I know it. She had a brother Bill.
Now, one of those ladies was Francis Crider's niece. I don't know which one, because Francis worked in the store, as I told you. Somebody worked there. One of those ladies was her niece. I don't know how that was.
Francis Crider's niece, and I don't know who that would be. Hilton, Lena Mae Hilton.
Okay.
Yeah, Lena Mae Hilton was her maiden name.
Okay.
Had a son, Bill, and she had an older brother, too. I don't know who her niece would have been. Now, there was a Betty, not Betty, but, yeah, Betty, Betty, and I can't think of her last name. This right.
Worked in the store?
Yes, and she worked in the store for years and years and years. She is an aunt to. Well, we're having a rough time with names today.
Yeah, right.
But we're going back 45 years. You know,
That's right.
something.
And see, everybody was new to me. Everybody was entirely new. I had to learn all these people, where you probably knew most of them.
Yes, I did know them. But you know, as we get older, we sometimes forget some of those things until it just comes to us. We'll come back to that
Right.
one. And who else do you remember in there? What do you remember about Brenny himself and Mrs. Brenneman and
Yes.
Clara?
Clara, she worked in the store a lot.
And do you remember a very attractive woman who had a hairdo with one pigtail that came all the way down? She now is no longer has the long pigtail, but she still lives in Wadsworth, and that would be Mrs. Houston. Remember her?
No, I don't.
About Houston's wife?
Oh, sure.
Yes, right.
Sure. I remember Bud better than the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was a pharmacist.
Yes.
And Clara Brenneman was a pharmacist as well. And in those days, women weren't pharmacists very often.
That's right. That's right. In fact, for a short time, Houston's lived down the street from me on Marlow.
Marlowe, Susie Houston.
Susie, that's right.
Susie and Bud.
And he was a professor, wasn't he?
Well, yes, he was professor at the University of Akron, and he was at the Orville branch at Wayne General Technical College for quite some time, and then he became my assistant at the University of Akron as assistant dean.
Okay.
And we worked together for 8 or 9 years, and just an outstanding person. Bud is an outstanding person. Of course, Susie is too. They have 2 children, 2 girls. We used to call them Mimi and Kiki, but you're not allowed to say that anymore. And it's Michelle and Cassandra. Yeah. But when Susie came to town, she was somewhat of an anomaly because women weren't in pharmacy at that time, but she worked there. And whom else do you remember there?
That's about all I could come up with.
Do you remember any of the other girls who worked in the around the pharmacy, around the counter, you know, where they had the?
I really don't.
Can't remember that one. I have to think of Betty's last name, Aunt Betty, and I know her husband very well. She died a few years ago. Her husband still lives in town, and
Did she, after that, work with the 5 and 10?
I don't know that she did.
That's not the one. Okay.
She could have been. I don't think so. That's entirely possible. Then let's go north of Brenneman's on High Street. Well, what do you remember there?
Well, you know, at one time there was a taxi stand right there.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bakery there.
Yes, it was not Ann's Bakery,
No.
but
And there were several houses in there, and I believe David Wursler had an inner office kind of behind there. Remember that little building?
yeah, behind the building, but that.
Right.
But now there were no houses right on when you were there in the 50s. There were no houses right on Main Street anymore, or on High Street anymore.
Well, what came out of there when they put the Huntington Bank in? What was there?
The Huntington Bank.
That was.
Oh, you mean that far up? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean right north of Brenneman's, right north of Brenneman's. We had B's Dress Shop. You remember that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Lee Vennick.
Yes, sure.
He was also from Akron.
Yes, Lee.
And Lee was also Jewish.
Right.
And then it became Gloria's
That's right.
dress shop, and that was Gloria Gloria Graff, right?
And Thompson was her maiden name.
Right, Gloria Thompson.
She's up around Sharon.
And then right north of that was the bakery.
Right.
There were some steps going upstairs to the offices upstairs, but then the bakery. Who was in the bakery at the time? It was Ann's Bakery, but it was, they were from Cleveland or Bedford or something like that.
Yeah, big guy.
Yeah.
I can't come up with his name.
And then one of the Hannah boys
Oh, yeah.
bought it.
I believe what happened, the Hannah boy worked for Mr. Kuhn, down
Right.
at Kuhn's Bakery. And then he bought Ann's and combined the two, I believe. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's pretty well correct. Now, his father is mayor of Wadsworth
Yes.
right now, and mother Josie, whose maiden name was Solanovic, pretty well managed it, and I think that they have sold it at this time, but it stayed as a bakery for quite some time, and a very popular place because, you know, those baked goods were extremely inviting, and they had them right there in the window. I mean, if they would have really wanted to be good to Wadsworth, they would have hidden them in the back. So people
I don't buy much baked goods, but I know they're very good.
Oh, they're very excellent, just excellent. And then they started building, as you have pointed out, there were houses there north, and there were some grocery stores and things like that, but they're houses. But then in the 50s, we built the Huntington Bank, and there were houses there. But the City Hall then was north of the Huntington Bank, and it was the First National Bank first, then the Huntington Bank after that. And all that parking lot back in there were all houses and lawns and things. And one of the houses back there was now I can't think of that name, but it was contested very heavily in the newspapers, very heavily, because they were going to tear it down. And
It was kind of a landmark, you mean?
yes, right, and they were contested that. Let's go across the street.
Before I do that,
Okay.
I saw one of your programs, and they mentioned the one building, I think before I came to town, there was a grocery store in a corner of,
Big W Market.
okay, well, I don't remember that. The first thing I remember there was a new building there.
Libes.
That's what somebody said on here, and that is true. However, Lawson's were also there.
That's right. Lawson's were there until the mid-60s.
Right, I just wanted to mention that because
That's right.
it wasn't
Lawson's
mentioned
was
on the
there.
program.
Lawson, you're right. That's right. Absolutely right. North of City Hall was the Lawson store. And one of the things that they were one of the first ones around to have what was called chip shop ham.
Yeah,
Yes, I remember that. I couldn't remember. That had completely
you know,
slipped.
they were there.
Going across the street then to the gas station. Do you remember the gas station, the Pure Oil station there?
No, I don't.
Well, it wasn't there for a very long period of time. What about the Fixlers Agency?
Oh, sure, sure.
Now, whom do you remember there, and what are they?
I remember Mr. Fixler. Clayton, was that his name? Clay? He was a,
C.F. Fixler.
yeah, he was a big man.
Oh, yes. Well, tall and thin.
Right, tall.
And kind of balding.
Right.
And then he had a son.
Tom.
Tom
He still has a business.
Oh, yes. Still, and Tom was stocky and
Yes.
very rugged looking.
And
Still is. It's just that. Then we had the church, and then across the street, and then the Masonic Temple,
Right.
which is now the Senior Citizens Group, and which was at one time the Recreation Center for Wadsworth.
Right.
And then south of that, what did we have?
I believe next we had the hotel,
The big hotel, right. Mhm. The Park Hotel.
Park Hotel.
Which, of course, was going into disrepair in the 50s, as you remember, and then, of course, they tore it down, and they put then the big, what are we going to call it for the want of a better name?
The Ben Franklin.
Ben Franklin, Brisbane's Pharmacy, and
Right.
so forth. Now, do you remember the big controversy that they had? What were they going to put there?
Yes, I believe I know somebody was on council at that time.
You were on council?
No, Caesar Carino was.
Oh, yes, I was on council.
I
at
remember
the time.
about that. Yes, there's a real controversy about taxing the people around there, about tearing down, taxing people. And before I forget, when I came to town, do you remember who was running that hotel? I understand originally it was Kreider's.
Kreider's, right.
And he had his horses in the barn in the back, okay.
Well, he had the veterinary shop in the back.
Okay, well, see, that's before I was here. I've only had hand-me-down stores.
And yes, he did have horses. As a matter of fact, Mary Louise Abbott Cooter would drive her horse from what we call Stony Ridge, which is Reimer Road. She would drive it to 2 miles into town and leave it at Kreider's, and then go over to the high school and then ride back at night.
But Doris Fixler was running that hotel.
Doris Fixler is a relative.
Okay.
Yes,
She was a very, shall we say, motherly, nice lady.
Oh, your whole family. They're just
She
really
was
great
running
people.
that hotel. And the guy I used to go fishing with stayed there. His name was Joe Witchy.
Joe Witchy, yes, 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 yes.
And we kind of forgot something, if you don't mind going
Oh, no,
backwards.
that's what we want you to do.
Over there, that block we're talking about, where Gloria's was and Bees.
Yes,
Now, LaSalle dry cleaners were right in there.
That's right, that's right. And incidentally, the fellow, there was an Afro-American fellow who worked in there, and he just died within the past 2 or 3 days. He used to work there in the mornings. I remember him very well. He just died in the past 2 or 3 days in LaSalle Cleaners. Who owned LaSalle Cleaners? Do you remember that?
Hazel Heberling or Heverling?
Heberling.
Heberling owned that.
Well, her husband, she and her husband.
Yep.
She was a Ray Heberling,
That's right.
and she was a Nicodemus,
Right.
Hazel Nicodemus. And the Nicodemuses were heavily involved with dry cleaners in Medina, and then Ray, as Heverin is what it was.
Heverin, that's it.
Ray Heverin's daughter married a Heberling.
That's true.
Yeah, so.
And Joe Witchy, who I mentioned, got to thinking about him. He worked probably the match, but he drove like evening or Saturdays for LaSalle Cleaners.
I didn't remember that.
Yes, he did.
Did
And
he?
he was never married. He
No.
stayed over at the Park Hotel. And he was from West Virginia originally. They had relatives, a nephew in Doylestown.
Right. I think that the nephew in Doylestown was, I think that his business was in lightning rods or something.
Well, probably because he was an electrician.
Yeah, lightning rods and electricity and so forth. But they were not necessarily related to the other witches here in town.
No, they were not.
I don't think they spelled it the same way.
I don't
Maybe
know.
they did, but they were not related to the
But
witches.
Joe was a great guy, so he and I used to go fishing.
And now is Joe gone?
He's been gone at least 20 years.
20 years. Tell us a little bit about Joe Witchy. Just kind of not a character necessarily.
No,
just
a dry humor.
Yeah.
A very outstanding, upright man from,
And tell us
from West Virginia originally.
Tell us his stature and his looks.
He was a big guy.
Big guy,
And
very big guy, as a matter
I
of
think
fact.
I still have a fishing box that he gave me to keep fishing worms in.
And what was his personality like when he was with friends? And then tell us what his personality was like when he was with people he didn't know.
Well, he was entirely different when he was with friends. He was almost a big talker, an extrovert, outgoing, but he was quiet and reserved and maybe a little bit backwards among kind of strangers, you know. But he drove for them part-time. He stayed at that hotel.
Yes. As long as I knew Joe Witchy, he was at that hotel.
Yeah, but me too. Because you
And-
knew him before I did, maybe.
When the hotel was destroyed then, I lost track. What did he do? Did he go somewhere else?
I think that he actually lived with his nephew in Doylestown.
Oh, I see,
I
afterwards.
believe he passed away there. I think Joe passed away in a Wayne County home.
Did he?
I believe he did. But I went over to his service at Dorstown on Barons and talked to, I don't know why I came up with his nephew's name right now, but he's gone too now, his nephew is.
The nephew is gone as well?
Yeah.
How did you meet him? I mean, how did you happen to go fishing with him?
I can't tell you that. I suppose he came in a store and got to talking to him or something, you know. I'm kind of almost West Virginian, you know, myself. And
Well, you're from southern Ohio, but...
right, just a few miles north there.
Yeah.
And they tell jokes about West Virginia, which don't bother me a bit. But so, yeah, Joe lived there in that hotel.
As we go south from the hotel, then, we went into the big Myers block.
Right.
And who was the first store there south of the hotel when you came to town? Was that still a bar?
Yeah, I believe
Bob's Cafe?
Sandals.
Bob's Sandals.
Sandals, yes, that's right.
And you probably didn't go in there very often, but
Truth, I was never in there actually. But
never in there at all. So, but Bob Sandals was just an upstanding
Oh,
person,
I
just
know
an
Bob
outstanding
Sandals.
person. The whole family just outstanding here in Wadsworth. I'm trying to get their second son on, Jim. Bob, his oldest son. Well, there are only two sons, so the older son is gone. He died a couple of years ago.
yes.
And I want to get a hold of Jim. I try to get some of the girls, but they don't want to come on, so I want to try to get Jim to see if he'll come on.
Well, I didn't want to either, but you talked me into it.
That's right.
So you can talk to them.
It takes, just so that we know, it takes only an hour to go through this program, but it takes approximately, on the average, of 5 to 10 hours of my time to get people to come onto the program.
I bet it does.
It's very difficult, and I think it's worth it, however, because, you know, these are the things which, when we're gone, the
I
members
was
are
going to
gone.
say it'd be worth it more when we're not even around here.
That's right, when we're not around, and there will be a time when we won't be around, and we need to have
Sooner
these
than
things.
we know.
That's right, that's exactly right. Now, do you remember the store right next to that then, right next to Bob's Cafe?
It seemed like there was something between that and Hoagland's, was there?
No, they were adjacent, as a matter of fact, the same building,
actually.
right?
Yeah, Hoagland's was there.
And tell us about Hoagland's and which Hoagland's you remember.
Only one I remember is Mrs. Hoagland.
Ruth?
I believe that her husband probably has.
He had already died. He hasn't been dead 45 years, has he?
Well, I don't remember him.
Yeah, his name was Highland Hoagland, Hilan Hoagland, and his brother Glenn Hoagland moved, or also worked, he was the mechanic in there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I remember him.
Glenn, and Glenn's still living, and love to get him on the program if I could.
He'd have a lot of information.
Oh, he has a tremendous amount of information, and we're trying to track him down, trying to get some of his friends to tell him that he should be on the program as well, because he would be able to tell us a great deal. Describe Ruth Hoagland to us a little bit.
A friendly person, a nice person. I think some people thought Ruth was a little bit sharp maybe or something, but that was just her nature.
Yeah, she was as kind as they came.
Exactly.
Yeah. Did you remember her son Dale who worked there?
Vaguely, yeah.
And then do you remember Edward Perkins?
Oh, of course, yeah. Then he bought it.
He bought it.
Sure,
Edward Perkins bought it, yeah. And do you remember Earl Shirk who worked there?
Yes, I do.
And tell us a little about Earl Shirk's personality.
You know, you give me the name. I can't actually.
Earl Shirk was the refrigerator salesman. He sold their appliances and all of that.
I don't remember him that well.
Kind of curly hair and the inveterate politician. I mean, politician kissing babies, that's exactly what he would do, you know, but he was a tremendous salesman, a smooth, elegant salesman. And you didn't know that you're being sold.
Right.
he was good. There was no question about that.
I don't actually remember that much about him.
Earl Shirk, yeah. And then we go from the hardware store down to, at that time, was it Wright's Department Store?
Right.
And tell us about who owned that and who was there at the time.
Well, at the time I remember, I think we maybe had a little conversation about this. Mr. Andrews managed it.
Andreas, right.
Andreas or something like that.
Yeah, yes, right. And do you remember the Diamonds at all? Sam and Julia Diamond?
No.
And they had a son also who was, who'd be about 70 years old now. But Sam and Julia Diamond, they were also Jewish. And they had the Wright's Department Store for a long, long time. And every woman in Wadsworth would go there because they had, I guess, dry goods, if that's the right term, you know, clothing materials.
Oh, they did, yeah.
And that kind of thing. They didn't have women's clothes or anything like that, but They had dry goods, and people would go in there all of the time.
But how did it become rights then?
Not sure, but I'm sure that someone out there knows, and I'm sure that I'll get a phone call of why it became
Because
rights.
Anders just managed it, I believe. I don't think he owned it.
Well, I'm thinking that the
You think-
Diamonds owned it. Maybe they just
No,
managed it.
I say after them, though.
Oh,
For-
possibly.
When Anders was managing it, I think he only managed it, but he may have owned it.
I'm not sure. And if anyone out there knows, we surely would
sure
like to
they do.
hear that. Then going west,
But before
go
I
ahead.
leave there, you remember what was upstairs in that building?
Bowling alley,
That's right.
right. Do you remember going up there?
When Catherine came to town, she bowled up there.
She bowled up there.
She never bowled before.
Who owned the bowling alley, remember?
I suppose Williams did, didn't he?
Yes. Well, the Williams twins, they're twin boys, Cloyd and Floyd, and they were the big bowlers. As a matter of fact, I don't know that I've ever seen, well, maybe I did later in life, but they always wore bowling shirts.
Yeah.
Yeah, always. And both tall, slender, and both balding. And I'm not sure whether it was Cloyd or Floyd who died, and then the other one was remaining.
Cloyd,
Cloyd died.
he died. He had a senile dog, if you remember.
Yes, right.
And Floyd lives out on Treese Road.
And
not
Floyd's still living.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to be able to get him on the program because he could tell us a tremendous
Yes,
amount.
he could.
Floyd would be probably in his 90s now, wouldn't he?
Don't suppose he's that old.
No?
But, yeah, he lives out on Treese Road.
Well, we ought to try to get him on the program.
And they had a brother, Carl,
Carl Williams, right?
and he, in his latter years, he lived down at the Towers.
Now, explain what the towers are so that 50 years from now people
Okay,
will
the
know.
Towers is run by the Medina Metropolitan Housing Authority. It's for people 62 or over, or anybody disabled. There's no limit on disabled.
And where is it located? In
It's
Wadsworth?
located at the corner of South Main and Garfield on the northeast corner. No, I'm sorry, northwest corner.
Northwest corner.
Northwest corner. The reason I mentioned Carl Williams, he was, when we were constructing it, he told me he'd like to have a room there. He told me where he wanted it. He wound up on the 6th floor, so he could look out west in the corner there. And I got Carl the room he wanted. You know, I was involved in that. I got him the room he wanted. And every time I see him uptown, Carl would thank me for that. He liked it there. And so many people, they are negative about things, you know that, and complaints, which is fine. But he always, every time I saw him, he thanked me for it.
Now, how did you become involved with the Medina County Metropolitan Housing Association?
Well, they were thinking about something for Wadsworth, and they wanted the board member from Wadsworth. There's 5 people on the board, and to cut it short as I can, they wanted somebody from Wadsworth. And at that time, we had a Republican common pleas judge, and you know how it goes, he was going to go for Republican. And he called me to be on that board.
Who was the Republican common pleas judge at the time?
Very controversial. He put the teachers in jail. Whitfield.
Oh, Judge Whitfield, right.
Okay. And he called me. He called me about 5 times. I said, you know, I'm kind of ignorant. I don't really agree with a lot of stuff that's happening in the HUD at these stages, you know. Of course, I still don't. But he talked me into it. He said, we need you, and we need somebody from Wadsworth, this and that. So I did consent to be on that board. That was 23 years ago.
23 years ago. Incidentally, one of the persons that he wanted to put in jail was Judy Cross,
That's
who was a
right.
teacher
That's right.
at
Brunswick.
Brunswick. And she refused to go to jail for whatever reason. And it's a good thing because she became a judge. And she's going to be retiring now at the end of 1998. And had she gone to jail, she could not have been a judge because you cannot be a judge if you've gone to jail, whatever the rules are there.
Well, talking about Judy, I have 5 near terms on this board, and she, one time was her appointment, and she appointed me, although, as you know, we're different prior.
Yeah, she's a Democrat and you're a Republican.
But she did reappoint me to the board.
And as soon as we go down the street here, one more, for
Okay.
another 3 or 4 minutes, I want you to tell us about all of your political involvement, because I think it's extremely important historically, and I think it has left a tremendous legacy of Wadsworth because of the way that you handle it. So we'll come back to that. We're going to go west now on, right from Wright's Department Store. We're going to go west on the north side of College Street. What was there then?
I believe it was next door was a Western Union.
Western Union. And of course we don't have those anymore.
That was run by a different Floyd Williams.
Right, and that Floyd Williams was not this one at all.
Not a native here at all.
No, but he was Floyd Williams, and he had describe his hair, for instance.
We didn't have much hair.
That's right.
And as I've remarked before, he was a pretty decent fast-pitch softball pitcher. In fact, I have batted against him when I first came to Wadsworth. I played a little softball.
Oh, is that right?
And he had a pretty good fastball and everything. But then they disbanded that office, and they transferred him to another office where they had Western Union, but I don't know where he went. And his daughter is married to the First Christian Church pastor in Mogador. The reason I know that, my niece and her husband go to that church, and Floyd Williams' daughter is the wife of the pastor there.
What is her name?
I can't tell you right now, but that's where
She's the minister's wife there in Mogador, the First Christian Church.
And her father was Floyd Williams.
Now, is he still living?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yes, he is. Yes, he is. Mm-hmm. Yes, he is.
Then right next door to the Western Union was what? You probably didn't go in that store either.
Well, that was a liquor store.
The liquor store, the state store.
State store.
We no longer have those anymore, do we?
Well, we have them, but not in Medina County.
Not in Medina
The
County.
smaller ones have been privatized.
Mm-hmm. And whoever wanted to buy liquor had to go there to buy it.
Sure.
And they're always busy, unfortunately.
Sure.
It's a value judgment, but they were always busy.
Yeah.
Then what did we have right next door to that?
Was Springer's Furniture Store next?
No, Don Merriman's.
Oh, Don.
Yeah.
We mentioned him, well, sure.
What did he sell?
Well, he had those pumps out front,
Right.
had gas, and he had a Goodyear store, and he sold Goodyear tires and products, but I think probably he sold as many records as anything else.
They had a huge record collection back
sure
there.
did.
And of course the 98 or the 80, 78s,
Yeah.
and then they later they came out with the other ones, but these were all 78s that I remember going back in there.
Yeah, he had a lot of records.
And Opal worked, his wife Opal
sure.
worked in there too.
And as you know, they're both still living,
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
and probably in the 90s,
Well, he probably is 94, 95, something like that.
and she's a year or two younger.
Yes, and
They had their 7th wedding anniversary a few years ago,
70th wedding anniversary. Wow. They never had children.
No.
No. And do you remember any of the people who worked there?
There's a guy who worked there, then he went to Florida.
Burbeck.
Burbeck, yeah.
And he married Joanne Kreider from Wadsworth.
That's right. And Paula Neath worked there.
Who?
Neath. Paula? What?
Paula Neath.
Paula
Yeah.
Neath.
Paula Neath died.
Yes.
Paula Neath
a year or
died
two
very
after
young.
she worked there.
Yeah, she died as a very young
Of
girl.
cancer.
Her father was Joe Neath, and he was a county commissioner and heavily involved with the Republican Party as well.
And he died in office.
He died in office, right? And related to Tom Cox
Yeah.
through that whole
Yeah.
operation there, just related to everybody in town.
Yeah, right. But see, I'm a stranger around here.
Yeah, Paula, rest her soul, she was a lovely, beautiful, beautiful girl.
You know,
And he had-
Joe, talking about Joe, he was conservative in his way. And I remember when they built that new courthouse in Medina, somebody wanted to add an extra something to the front, it cost like $10,000 that time. Joe didn't think he should do that.
No.
But he stood outside and would ask everybody going past what they thought about it. Well, affirmative was what they all said. So Joe agreed to add that whole extra.
He agreed to it. No. Now, he's a very fair person. I have to tell you a little story about Joe. I went to his funeral.
Sure.
And his son, Joe Neath, who was in Michigan at the time as an attorney,
Yeah.
was the only one there, obviously, because Paula had died and there were only two in the family. And before he died, Joe and I became close friends. The old Joe and I
Yeah.
became close friends because I was in Wadsworth politics, and
Sure.
He told me, and I'll swear to this to my dying day, he said, the only Democrat that I've ever voted for in my lifetime was Caesar Carino.
And that almost surprises me.
And it's surprising that he would have done that. That's right. Well,
Not that you didn't deserve it,
well, no,
but we know Joe, though.
But that's right. We do know Joe. He was a strong Republican. Now then, you had mentioned another of the Springer's Furniture Store. Tell us about Al Springer and his wife.
Well,
and
Al Springer was a small guy and not in
bald-headed,
not much
mustache.
hair. Yes, right. And
Beautiful wife.
yes, then he had a son and a daughter, the way
Yes.
I remember. And they had a nice furniture store there. I bought some things there, but they weren't in there too long after I came to town.
No, they did. They left town. They were there for just a while, and then they left town. And of course, then right behind there was what our good friend Roy Moore had.
Yeah. And as we mentioned, in that Minder Court, Mrs. Powers lived in a small house there.
Which Mrs. Powers was this?
I don't know. She was a real short lady, and of course, gray hair when I knew her. Roy Powers' mother, but I don't know what her name was.
I can't remember it either, but someone remembers it, I'm sure. And they'll probably remind us of what that name was. And then, of course, the church.
Right.
Now, tell us about a little bit of your political affiliations here in town and what you've done. I think that you probably are the longest-lived member of the executive committee of the Republican Party ever to go through Wadsworth. Is that pretty well correct?
That probably is correct. I don't know.
Tell us how you got involved.
Well, I think in 1956, I walked into the Citizens Bank and Sterling Secrets was there.
And Sterling was a very strong Republican.
Right. And you remember Willard Stout?
Oh, surely.
Well, he had been a precinct committee man, and you and I know what this means, it's the grassroots level.
Right.
Willard had been, he worked at 5 and 10 actually, he moved. And he'd been precinct committee man, and I chose a vacancy. And I went in a bank, and Sterling corralled me and gave me his sales pitch, which I use sometimes myself now. He said, I went down this list of all the eligible voters in your precinct, he says, and your name just popped out at me.
Just popped right out.
Yeah, that's Stern, you know. So I use that myself sometimes. And so that's how I got started. Really.
And that was what, 1950 what?
1956.
1956. You were active in the party, but you never ran for office yourself. Is that right?
I didn't run for office. I had a chance to get on appointed and opposed a couple of times, like when Dick Holmes resigned. But I was busy running the store. And of course now, you might hear from me in about 3 years. Right now I'm on the Board of Elections, and I cannot, I've been Board of Elections I'm on my 4th term now.
You can't run when you're on the Board of Elections. Now, the Board of Elections, explain the Board of Elections as it occurs in 1998.
Well, I'm telling stuff that you know, that maybe people don't know. There has to be an equal number from each party on the board. In Medina County, or Edward County High, there are 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans.
Now, believe it or not, right now we have only 2 parties that are represented.
Yeah.
One of these days, we're going to probably get, let's just say, forced into having more than 2 parties.
Well, they
right?
have to get enough of the votes on the ballot before
That's
they
right.
can be recognized. They didn't have enough this time. They had candidates, but they didn't have 5%.
But one of these days it's going to happen.
True.
So right now, the Republican Democrats
There are
are the
only
only
2
ones.
major parties.
That's right, 2 major parties.
And
tell us how they are appointed, elected, or whatever.
Well, there are 2 from each party. And your executive committee, and we're taking some shortcuts here, has a meeting, and they choose somebody from Medina County, and they forward the name to the Secretary of State. And most times he'll approve that appointment. I know one case in your party for he didn't approve it.
Oh, he did not?
That's when Ted Brown was Secretary of State.
Do you remember the person who was not approved?
I think I'll tell you later because I might have the wrong name.
Okay.
But anyway, Tom Wolf can tell you, but I think I can tell you. Anyway, Tom Wolf is a great friend of mine, a good friend of mine, I should say. But there are 2 from
Tom Wolf is the present Democratic chair of the Democratic Party.
Yes, and he's chairman of the Board of Elections.
He's also the chairman of the Board of
I
Elections?
used to be chairman. When,
Is it passed around? Is that
no. When Sherrod Brown was Secretary of State, I was chairman because the chairman of the election board has to be the opposite party of the Secretary of State.
Okay.
So when Sherrod was, it had to be Republican, that was me. But now when we've had Taft Secretary of State, so it has to be a Democrat chairman.
Democrat.
And Tom Wolf is, and he's a very fair chairman.
Oh, very fair. There's no question. I mean, politics notwithstanding, just a very fair person.
True, that's what, but there are 4 members on there. And I don't mind telling you that there are 2 people from that office working there that are from Wadsworth.
That's right. That would be
Linda Kramer.
Linda Kramer, and who's the other one?
Diana, I have trouble with the last name. Is
I don't know her. I know Linda Kramer. Linda Kramer's maiden name was
Al
Cordray.
Al.
Cordray, right. Mm-hmm.
And I have actually got both those people that job in there.
You got both the people the job in there. No.
And because I've looked after Wadsworth.
And it's good that we do. It's good we do. The reason
Diana's name is A-B-R-I-G-G. I have trouble.
Abrig, maybe?
I suppose. And just to get, and she has her own identity, but I was just telling you, she's Norman Bragg's cousin.
Oh, she is Norman Bragg's cousin?
Yeah.
No, I did not know that. No, I
Yeah.
didn't. Uh-huh. Diana Abrig.
Uh-huh.
I see. Okay.
And they have both, I'm proud that they're from Wadsworth. I've, throughout my time, got several people jobs around, and I always get some of the college students jobs working on the highway in the summertime, you know, and I haven't had anybody disappoint me from Wadsworth.
That's a good idea, and we need to have Wadsworth represented there. Tell us some of the things that that you're allowed to tell about your activities within the party. I think that historically that it would be of interest to people to know what kinds of things that you were able to do, and particularly since you're such a fair person yourself. You talk about Tom Wolf being fair. Everyone in Medina County knows not only how fair you are, but how kind you are. So tell us what some of the things are that you've been able to accomplish as a long-term committee person in the Republican Party.
Well, I don't know that it's accomplished very much, but as you know, there are 150 precincts in Medina County.
150 precincts.
And you run on the ballot every 4 years. And it's, of course, it's mostly an unopposed position because a lot of people don't want to do the work. But then you have an organization meeting after the primary, as you've attended many, I'm sure. And those 150 people, if you have them all filled, select a county chairman for Central Committee. And for some reason, I've been selected for that for several years. And then from that bunch of 150, you picked any number that your party decides for executive committee. Now our number now is 34, I believe.
For the executive committee?
Mm-hmm. It's large. I'm on that also.
Now in the Democrats, on 21.
When I first went on, we had 12.
12.
And it's kept expanding, and somebody wants one of their friends on, and et cetera, you know. And we do have 34 members now.
Of course, you have more Republicans in Medina County than you have Democrats, too.
Yeah. Of course, there are more.
Independents.
Yeah, I call them non-affiliated is the proper word.
I think, what do they call them? NAs, which are non-affiliated. Non-affiliated, right, non-affiliated.
Yeah, there are roughly about 60% of the registered voters.
Right.
We have 85,000 registered voters in Medina County now. It keeps getting larger and larger.
Larger and larger. Let me lead you into what I'm talking about. The Republican Party has been extremely, now this is not a political kind of a thing I'm talking about, I want a historical. The Republican Party has been extremely successful in getting party seats, the county seats, and also elections to the city offices, and that has to come from an organization. Now, what part do you play in the organization? I mean, I'm not trying to get you to say anything that you don't want to say, but I'm trying to for historical evidence, just what kinds of things have you been able to do as a strong proponent of the Republican Party in Medina County? For instance, I'll give you some examples. You've had several judges. You've had recently a new sheriff, a couple more judges just recently. You've had 3 commissioners. As a matter of fact, there have been only 2 Democratic commissioners in the history of Medina County, and things like that. I guess what I'm asking, what part do you play in that?
Well, I'm generally on one of the committees to select candidates, and we try to get people who we think will do a good job, and check on their background, of course. Of course, in Medina County, you know most of the background.
Oh, surely. Mm-hmm.
But we try to get people who think they do a good job and who have the time to do the job. And let's face it, finally, if they're electable, you know,
That's right. Mm-hmm. And if they can raise money.
That's getting very important.
Yeah.
It costs, you know, maybe $40,000 now to run a commissioner's race.
Yeah, that's too much. It's something, we have to do something about that, because only the people who can afford it can run, and that's not a democratic.
No, it is not.
No,
It is not.
it should be, anyone should be able to do it.
And then we, you know, have private meetings and lay out your campaign strategy, actually, you know.
Well, you are actually a big cog in this wheel, though.
No.
You don't think you are? Very highly respected by both parties. You know that. Without identifying political affiliation here, what are the strengths that you think that you have offered to the party, which probably few people have been able to offer?
Well, I think that probably the party, I've been able to get along with the factions, and there are factions, you know this, from Wadsworth and Medina,
of course,
and Brunswick in the county. I seem to, when my name comes up for one of the offices in the organization, in fact, the last several times I've been unopposed when we organize, I should say. I think that it's probably that I get along with people from other parts of the county pretty well. And,
because of your personality and the fact that you are so just straight up and fair.
I think
you are not political. You are a statesperson rather than a statesman, rather than a politician.
Whatever.
Yeah. Now, what is your role? What is your office now in the party? At
the present time, I'm chairman of the Medina County Central Committee. That's my role. I'm also a precinct committee man. And I'm also, as I said, on Board of Elections. But I think to answer your wanting is I'm chairman of the Medina County Central Republican Party.
But you are not the chairman of the executive committee?
No, but we had two as one. Don Simmons is.
Don Simmons is.
Now, I know Tom Wolf is chairman of both of yours.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But we do it differently, and we have 2 chairmen.
We have 1 chair for the Central Committee and 1 chair for the executive.
Right.
In the Democratic Party, we have just 1 chair for both.
I know that.
And you are the chair of the Central Committee, which comprises 150 possible Republican precinct people in Medina County.
Right.
And then you have 31 people who are, or did you say 31?
I said 34.
34 people who are part of the executive committee, and Don Simmons is chairman of that, right? You know, you probably don't feel in your own mind, because of your humility, you probably in your own mind don't feel that you have shaped a great deal of the goodness of Medina County. And politics notwithstanding, Republican, Democrat, whatever, one of the reasons that Medina County is as good as it is and is as prosperous as it is, and is more than likely growing at the capacity that it is right now, or beyond the capacity, I should say probably, that it is right now, probably can be related to people like you and other good Republicans who have made sure that we are fiscally sound, that we are doing what we're supposed to do as far as the business is concerned, and picking out some very, very fine people for elections. And you helped do that. And I think that that's part of the legacy, and that's why we wanted to bring it up today. It's not a political thing. wanted to bring up today the fact that whoever is responsible, we don't care, but you have been responsible, have been very, very much involved, and that part of the legacy we are extremely happy to have had as part of our history. You came to us as an adult, and you've been here for 45 years, but you certainly have made a strong impact, and we want to thank you for that and for everything else you've done. But the finest legacy beside fixing jewelry with that little loop that you have is the fact that you reared and nurtured such a wonderful family. So thank you again for being our guest for 3 times, and we are so pleased that we have had this opportunity to chat with you again. Our time is up, unfortunately, once again, so we're just going to say goodbye at this point, and perhaps we'll have you back at another time. Thank you very much.